In a small town in England stood a century-old mansion. The locals called it Blackwood Manor. Legend had it that anyone who entered the manor never came back out alive. But one day, a group of audacious university students decided to test their luck. Among them was a young woman named Sophia. Her friends teased her for being superstitious, but she couldn't shake off the eerie feeling she had about the old house. The group reached the manor one dark evening. The once grand entrance was now obscured by broken, decaying gates. A rusty lock hung on the door, but the moment Daniel touched it, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark and narrow hallway. Inside, the air was heavy and damp. The scent of rot and abandonment hung in the stillness. As they ventured deeper into the manor, Emma whispered nervously, "I feel like someone is watching us." Suddenly, from the upper floor, the sound of a child's laughter echoed through the silence, sending shivers down their spines. They found themselves in a large, dusty room that was once a ballroom. Moonlight streamed through a broken window, illuminating swirling patterns on the floor. In the center, an old gramophone stood silent, and on its side, a faded photograph of a family whose eyes seemed to follow them. As they continued their exploration, the laughter seemed to follow them, growing louder, more menacing. They found a nursery with a rocking horse moving rhythmically back and forth, as if propelled by an invisible hand. The rocking horse didn't stop even after they pushed it to a halt. It just kept rocking. Then they stumbled upon a secret passage behind a bookshelf. It led them to a small, dark room with a single wooden box in the corner. Michael, always the skeptic, scoffed at their fears. He opened the box, and inside, they found a diary. As they read through the brittle pages, they learned the tragic story of a young girl named Eliza, who had lived in the manor 100 years ago. Eliza's diary entries detailed a life of isolation and despair. She wrote about her parents, who were so consumed by their grief over their stillborn son that they neglected her, leaving her to the care of an old, cruel nanny. Eliza's only solace was her imaginary friend, a boy named Thomas, who brought her joy and laughter. But then, one day, Eliza's parents decided to send her away to a boarding school. On her last day in the manor, she wrote, "I don't want to go. This house is all I have. I'll be all alone. Oh, Thomas, will you stay with me?" The last entry ended abruptly with the words, "They're here. I can hear them. I'm so scared." And then there was nothing. As they closed the diary, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candle they had brought with them. Panic seized them. They felt an overwhelming sense of dread and the sound of footsteps approaching them. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the laughter stopped. They heard a knock on the wall, as if someone or something was trying to get their attention. Then silence. Frightened, they fled the manor, stumbling over each other in their haste to escape. Outside, the night was dark and silent. The old house loomed behind them, its windows like vacant eyes. They didn't stop running until they reached the safety of Sophia's car. Back in the familiar surroundings of her bedroom, Sophia couldn't shake off the feeling that something had followed them home. She looked around, half expecting to see Eliza standing in the corner of her room. But it was empty. The next morning, she told her friends about the diary and the story of Eliza. They had all been shaken by their experience, but none more so than Daniel. He had dismissed Eliza's story as just a legend, a way to scare young thrill-seekers like them. But now, he wasn't so sure. He suggested they return to the manor, this time during the day, to search for more clues about Eliza's fate. But Sophia couldn't bring herself to go back. The thought of entering that decaying house again filled her with dread. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of their terrifying night at Blackwood Manor faded into the background of their lives. Yet sometimes, when the wind howled through the trees outside her window, Sophia would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced she heard the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing through the darkness. The old house loomed before them, dark and foreboding against the stormy sky. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf. 4 friends, Michael, Daniel, Sophia, and Emma, stood on the threshold, their faces pale in the flickering light of the porch lamp. They had come to investigate the legend of the Blackwood family, who had lived in this house over 200 years ago. According to local lore, every member of the Blackwood family had died under mysterious circumstances, and their spirits were said to haunt the house to this day. Taking a deep breath, Michael pushed open the door and stepped inside. The others followed, and they began to explore the dusty rooms, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they moved from room to room, they could feel the weight of the house's history pressing down on them. The four friends slowly began climbing the staircase. The wooden steps creaked under their feet, as if no one had walked on them for centuries. At the top, they found themselves in a corridor lined with old portraits. Each painting showed members of the Blackwood family, but strangely, all of their eyes had turned cloudy and blood red. Sophia, the bravest of the group, leaned closer to examine one of the portraits. It was a self-portrait of a man named Thomas Blackwood, who had apparently been the last male heir of the family. His eyes stared back at her, and she could have sworn that she saw a flicker of movement in them. Just as she was about to turn away, the painted eye blinked. She screamed and stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael, who had been walking behind her, caught her arm and said, "It's just your imagination. There's nothing to be afraid of." But at that very moment, whispers seemed to fill the corridor around them. "Why are you here? Why are you here?" The voices were soft, but they sent shivers down the friends' spines. Emma dropped the flashlight, and for a moment, the only light came from the flashes of lightning outside. Then it flickered on and off again, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Suddenly, faint footsteps echoed in the hallway, the sound of someone or something padding softly towards them. "Quick, let's get out of here," Daniel said, his voice trembling. He had been the quietest of the group so far, but now fear lent urgency to his words. They turned and ran, their footsteps clattering on the stairs. As they reached the bottom step and started to make their way to the front door, the whispers grew louder. "Get out! Get out!" they hissed, and the footsteps behind them grew louder and more insistent. Suddenly Daniel stopped. He turned to his friends, his face ashen. Someone just touched my shoulder," he stammered, his eyes wide with terror. Michael, Sophia, and Emma froze, listening intently. Had they really only heard footsteps, or was there something else in the house with them? Then, just as suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the wind and the rain. The friends stood motionless, each consumed by their own thoughts. What had that touch felt like? Had they really been alone in that house? After what felt like an eternity, Michael finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I think we should leave." The others didn't need to be told twice. They fled the house, stumbling over one another in their haste to get away. Once they were safely outside, they didn't stop running until they reached the shelter of the trees at the edge of the property. Panting and terrified, they turned to look at the house. It seemed to loom at them, darker and more menacing than ever. And then they saw it. In the topmost window of the house, a single red eye blinked at them in the darkness. The flickering candlelight danced in Daniel's wide, terrified eyes. He could still feel the touch of a cold, icy hand on his shoulder. But when the others looked, there was no one there. "We have to find out what this is," Sophia said, her voice shaking slightly. "It can't just be our imagination." Her three companions, Daniel, Emma, and Michael, didn't reply. They were too busy scanning the shadowy corridors for any sign of movement. They had been exploring the Blackwood family estate for hours, ever since they stumbled upon a hidden passage in the attic of the manor house. The passage led them to this place, a labyrinth of tunnels that seemed to stretch on forever beneath the mansion. And they soon realized they weren't alone. They had felt unseen eyes upon them, heard whispers in the darkness just beyond their sight. Michael, normally the strong and silent type, pushed forward, trying to steady everyone's nerves. He reached the end of the corridor, where a heavy door stood shut. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, as if marking some kind of ancient ritual. He pushed against it, and with a long creak, the door slowly opened. Inside was a vast chamber, and the sight that greeted them made their blood run cold. At the very center stood a massive stone tomb. Etched upon it were the words, "Here lies Edward Blackwood." "Edward Blackwood," Emma whispered fearfully. "He was the head of the family. His portrait was among the ones we saw." She recalled the portraits from the attic, the stern faces leering down at them from their gilded frames. Now they knew who Edward Blackwood was, and a chill went down her spine. Suddenly, droplets of blood began seeping from the cracks of the tomb. The flickering candlelight danced in Daniel's wide, terrified eyes. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body wouldn't obey him. He could only watch in horror as the tomb before them began to shake violently. Then a deep voice echoed through the chamber, a voice that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. "You should not have come here," it boomed. The words hung in the air, each syllable dripping with menace. Sophia spun around in terror. In the far corner of the chamber, she saw a small figure standing between the shadows. As she watched, a small child stepped into the flickering candlelight. His eyes glowed crimson, and a sinister smile spread across his face. "Who are you?" Sophia managed to gasp, her voice barely a whisper. The child tilted his head, his smile widening, revealing teeth that were far too sharp, far too long for a child's mouth. "I am Edward," he replied, his voice a raspy whisper that seemed to mock their fear. "And this," he gestured to the tomb behind him, "is my forever home. Or perhaps," he added with a wicked grin, "it will be yours." With a burst of speed, he darted from his hiding place, a wicked grin splitting his face. The others, startled by his sudden movement, took a step back, their eyes wide with terror. Daniel, his voice shaking, stammered, What do you want?" Edward stopped in front of them, his smile never fading. "I want to play," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with an unearthly light. Before any of them could respond, he vanished, melting back into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. Sophia, her heart pounding in her chest, turned to her companions. "We need to get out of here," she whispered urgently, her eyes darting around the chamber. "Now!" They didn't need to be told twice. They had seen enough of Edward Blackwood's dark legacy to last a lifetime. As they fled, the sound of their own pounding hearts echoed in their ears, each thump like a drumbeat on the walls of their terror. The flickering candlelight danced in Daniel's wide, terrified eyes. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body wouldn't obey him. The flickering candlelight danced in the wide, unblinking eyes of the child standing before them in the shadows. His crimson eyes glowed ominously in the darkness as he slowly stepped toward them, a faint, eerie laugh escaping his lips. Who are you?" Sophia's voice trembled, her eyes fixed on the unsettling figure. "I am the heir of Edward Blackwood," the child replied, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "And you are not his guests, you are his prey." As if summoned by the child's words, the very walls of the chamber seemed to writhe and twist. Suddenly words began to appear on the chamber walls, written in what looked like dripping blood. "Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice." Emma screamed in terror and turned to flee, but the heavy wooden door slammed shut with a deafening bang, plunging them into darkness. Michael rushed to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. Daniel's eyes widened in horror as he watched the stone tomb at the far end of the chamber begin to crack open. A chilling gust of wind swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of decay, and a thick, unnatural mist began to pour out. From the swirling mist emerged a tall, shadowy figure, taking shape before their horrified gazes. It was the spirit of Edward Blackwood himself, his form emaciated and decaying, yet imposing, his eyes blazing with crimson fire. "You have trespassed into my domain, mortals!" Edward's voice thundered through the chamber, echoing with an otherworldly power. "And now you shall pay the ultimate price." Jonathan, paralyzed with fear, could only stammer, This is impossible. We need to get out of here." "Escape? How could you escape the clutches of the great Edward Blackwood?" The ghost sneered, his form beginning to glow an eerie green. "I have waited centuries for this moment, for the chance to free my bloodline from this cursed tomb. And now you have stumbled into my path, providing the sacrifice I need." "I don't understand," whispered Sophia, stepping closer to the edge of the light cast by the torches, her curiosity battling with her fear. "What sacrifice?" A cruel smile twisted Edward's decaying lips. "To free my bloodline, a new soul must be sacrificed, and that sacrifice shall come from one of you." A wave of terror washed over the group, the realization of their dire situation crashing down upon them. They were trapped in a tomb with the ghost of a murderous sorcerer who demanded a life for a life. Michael, always the quick thinker, was the first to recover. "We have to do something," he hissed, frantically searching for a way out. But the door was still firmly shut and the windows barred. "There has to be another way out of here," he muttered, his voice tight with urgency. Daniel, however, wasn't looking for an exit. His gaze was fixed on the child standing in the flickering candlelight. The boy's face was pale, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. As Edward continued to rant about his plans for domination and revenge, Daniel noticed the boy's expression change. A cruel smile slowly spread across the child's face, more sinister than any adult could manage. It was the smile of one who reveled in the impending doom of others. Suddenly, the boy raised his head and let out a blood-curdling laugh, a sound that sent shivers down everyone's spine. He was enjoying this, relishing in the fear that radiated from the 5 captives. But it was Daniel who noticed the glint of something metallic in the child's hand, a glint that glinted with every movement of his tiny hand. As the spirit of Edward Blackwood loomed closer, his voice booming with power, the boy took a step back, revealing a small, wickedly curved dagger. His smile widened, his eyes gleaming with triumph. In the ensuing chaos, no one had noticed the boy slipping the dagger into his pocket. Now, with Edward distracted, the boy made his move. Swift and silent as a shadow, he vanished into the darkness. "Stop him!" Daniel yelled, lunging for the boy, but he was too late. The chamber shook violently as the spirit of Edward Blackwood laughed, a sound that echoed through the ages, a sound that proclaimed the coming doom of Blackwood Manor. Sophia gasped, stumbling backward. Her fingers tightened around the silver locket. The spirit of Edward Blackwood roared with laughter, and the blood-written words on the walls grew darker and deeper. "Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice." Her feet felt rooted to the ground. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. What did he mean? What did he want? Suddenly, Edward raised a finger and declared, "The sacrifice has been chosen." Everyone turned to look at one another. Michael shook his head, eyes wide with fear. Daniel reached out to comfort Sophia, but she flinched away from his touch. Her gaze was locked onto Edward's ghastly form, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. Then, as if Edward had spoken directly to her, she knew what she had to do. With a sob, she stepped forward. "I'll do it. Take me instead." Edward let out another ear-splitting laugh. The chains at his wrists and ankles flashed, and in a flash they shot out like whips. Before Sophia could react, the chains wrapped around her legs and yanked her off her feet. She screamed, but the sound caught in her throat as the chains dragged her closer to the gaping hole in the wall and the dark, dank tomb beyond it. Terror flooded through her, but it was quickly eclipsed by a surge of protective love for her sister. This was all her fault. She should have listened to Daniel and Michael and stayed away. Now Emma was in danger. "Emma!" she cried out, reaching for her sister. Chains wrapped around Emma's legs too and pulled her down. Emma shrieked, "Help me! Get me out of here!" Desperate, wild-eyed Sophia and Daniel struggled to pull her free, but the chains binding her were too strong. They were like iron, cold and unyielding. The iron chains dragged Emma slowly toward the tomb, her face pale as death, her eyes wide with terror. Sophia screamed, "Don't let him take her. Please, please help me." Michael, summoning every ounce of courage he possessed, pushed past her. He had to do something, anything to stop those chains. His eyes frantically searched for a way out, for an escape, for anything that could help. And then he saw it. Near the foot of the tomb, half hidden in the shadows, lay the old iron cross that had fallen from the wall during their fight with the gargoyles. Hope surged through him. Maybe, just maybe, this could help. He lunged for the cross and grasped it tightly. As he scrambled to his feet, he called out to Edward, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Leave my daughter alone, you monster! Leave us all alone!" Edward let out a deafening roar of rage. The chains holding Emma suddenly tightened, yanking her off her feet and hurling her against the wall. Blood trickled down her forehead, leaving a dark stain on her white dress. Sophia cried out, rushing to her sister's side. She had to do something, anything to stop the bleeding, to make Edward stop. She reached into her pocket for the silver locket, clutching it tightly. She held it over Emma, and as she did, the spirit of Edward Blackwood snarled, "You think that will help you now? That won't save you or your sister." With a sudden surge of strength, she shoved the locket into Emma's hand. "Do it, Emma," she whispered urgently. "Do it now." Edward screamed in fury, and the air grew heavy and still. The chains connecting Emma to the wall snapped like thread. Taking advantage of the distraction, Sophia and Daniel stumbled back. Michael stood firm, brandishing the cross like a weapon. The cross that moments before had seemed so heavy in his hands suddenly felt light. Almost as if guided by an invisible force, he raised it high above his head and brought it down toward Edward, who snarled and recoiled as if burned. At that instant, the chamber lights flickered and died. In the suffocating darkness, only Emma's blood-curdling screams echoed. Then, silence. When the light returned, Emma was gone. Only a blood-soaked ribbon lay upon the floor where she had been. Edward's voice boomed one final time. "The sacrifice has been taken, but this manor still hungers." The heavy door creaked open on its own, and Sophia, Daniel, and Michael bolted outside. As they ran, they could hear the chains dragging Emma away. Away from them, away from everything. They didn't dare glance back. But as they stumbled through the darkness, they could have sworn they heard the echo of Edward's laughter carried on the wind. When they finally dared to glance back, the window on the third floor was glowing an eerie red. And in that window, they saw the horrifying visage of the child with the red eyes. He stared directly at them, his expression unreadable, his eyes burning like hot coals, and as they watched in helpless terror, he vanished.